That was the night I called my brother. That was the night I stopped trying to be someone they would ever accept. I should back up. My name is Fiona, and I'm 33 years old. I work as a dental hygienist in Oakville, Ontario, which is a perfectly respectable job that I happen to love, a fact that apparently disqualified me from being good enough for the Hartwell family the moment Brendan's mother learned what I did for a living. Not a dentist, she said once, very quietly, almost to herself, as though she were filing a complaint with the universe. Just the hygienist. That was 6 months before the Christmas party. I should have listened to that sentence more carefully. I met Brendan at a friend's cottage on Georgian Bay the summer before last. He was tall, a bit sunburned, laughing at something by the dock, and when he turned around and caught me looking, he didn't look away. We talked until 2 a.m. on that dock, with the bugs bad and the stars better, and by the end of the weekend I thought, this is something. Brendan worked in commercial real estate in Toronto, which I mention not because it mattered to me, but because it mattered enormously to his family, and understanding that distinction is the whole point of this story. His mother's name is Constance Hartwell. His father, Richard, was quieter, more or less a man-shaped shadow that Constance occasionally addressed. They lived in a large house in Forest Hill, the kind that has a name. Not a street address, a name. And Constance decorated it herself every December with the kind of precision that suggested the holidays were something she competed in professionally. I met them in September, which was maybe too soon. Brendan wanted me to meet them at their cottage in Muskoka, which sounded casual, which it was not. Constance served white wine and asked me questions the way a customs officer asks questions, politely, systematically, looking for something that didn't belong. She asked where I went to school. She asked where my parents were from. She asked, very sweetly, whether I rented or owned. I rented a condo in Oakville, a nice one. A 1-bedroom with a balcony where I kept tomatoes in the summer, which felt like completely normal information until Constance looked at me with a particular kind of sympathy. The kind you'd give someone who just lost something small but irreplaceable. Brendan squeezed my hand under the table. He said, "She's saving for a place," which was true, but which somehow made it worse, the way he said it, apologetically, like he was explaining a minor setback. I smiled. I drank my wine. I told myself this was just the first impression, that people weren't always who they were in the first 5 minutes. I kept telling myself that for 6 months. There was a pattern to it once I knew to look. Constance never said anything overtly cruel. She was too practiced for that. It was more of a series of precise, deniable diminishments. She would ask Brendan questions about his week at work, and then turn to me with a bright smile and say, "And you? Busy week at the office." She referred to the clinic as the office. She asked once at a dinner in October whether I'd ever thought about going back to school, which was interesting since I'd already done 2 years of college to become certified, but I understood that in Constance's taxonomy, college didn't fully count. She brought up, unprompted, a woman named Sabrina, who Brendan had dated in his late 20s. An investment banker, apparently, very driven, very successful. What a shame it hadn't worked out. Brendan never said anything. That was the thing I kept returning to, even before Christmas. He never said anything. Not to correct her, not to push back, not even to change the subject with any real force. He'd squeeze my arm, or say "Mom" in a mild, tired way, and then move on. He was not a bad man. I want to be clear about that. He was a gentle person who had been so thoroughly shaped by that household that he didn't even notice the shape anymore. I noticed it. The Christmas party was Constance's annual tradition. 30 or 40 people, catered, the kind of event with a theme. This year it was winter white. Everyone was asked to wear white or cream or silver, which I didn't know until Brendan mentioned it 4 days before, slightly sheepish, as if he'd been debating whether to tell me at all. I found a dress, ivory, knee-length, fitted, simple, and I thought it looked good. My friend Danielle told me I looked great. I believed her. The party was on a Saturday in mid-December. My brother Cillian drove down from Barrie to watch my cat, which was the excuse I used. And which was true, but also, honestly, I wanted someone nearby who I could call if things went badly. He lived 40 minutes away. I thought, that's close enough. Brendan picked me up at 6. He was dressed in a pale gray suit, his hair neater than usual, and he looked handsome and anxious in equal measure. In the car, he said, "My mom's been a bit stressed with the planning." A warning, disguised as an observation. "I'll be fine," I said. I believed that, too. The house was exactly what you'd expect. Candlelight everywhere, a 12-foot tree in the foyer, servers with trays of champagne, a string quartet in the living room, playing things that blended into one long, elegant murmur. Constance was at the door greeting people when we arrived, wearing a white wool blazer and a necklace that I later found out was her grandmother's, and she kissed Brendan on both cheeks and then looked at me. "Fiona," she said, in a tone that suggested she had been hoping I might cancel. I said, "Your home looks beautiful, Constance. Thank you for having me." She smiled without her eyes and moved on to the next guests. I found champagne. I found Brendan's aunt, a perfectly warm woman named Louise, who asked me good questions and actually listened to the answers. I found a corner near the fireplace that I liked. I thought, maybe tonight will be fine. There was a moment, about an hour in, where I should have seen what was coming. Constance had gathered a small group of her friends by the dining room entrance. The women were grown and successful, whose houses also had names, and Brendan had drifted into that orbit, the way he always did at family things, pulled by some invisible tide I could never quite see. I had been talking to Louise, and I looked up, and I could see Constance leaning into one of her friends, the two of them looking in my direction. I told myself I was being paranoid. I should stop telling myself things. The actual moment happened about 40 minutes later. Constance came to find me. Not incidentally, deliberately, and she had 2 of her friends with her, a woman named Philippa and another one whose name I never caught, and they approached the little seating area near the hallway where I was standing talking to one of Brendan's cousins. "Fiona," Constance said, "I wanted to introduce you to Philippa. Her son is a cardiologist." I said, "That's wonderful." I meant it neutrally. Constance said, "Philippa was asking about you, about what you do," I told Philippa. "Dental hygienist. Oakville." I was pleasant about it. I'd had a lot of practice being pleasant about it. And then Constance said, looking at Philippa rather than me, "Brendan could have done so much better, don't you think?" She said it lightly, conversationally, as though commenting on the weather. The room didn't stop. No one gasped. The string quartet kept going. I stood very still, and then Constance turned to me. And she reached out, and she put her hand flat against my chest and pushed. Not hard enough to knock me down, hard enough to make it clear she could. Hard enough that the champagne in my glass sloshed and the people around us went quiet. "You're standing in the way," she said. "Excuse us." She walked past me. The second one came a few minutes later. I don't fully know what triggered it. I had moved to the hallway. I needed air, and Constance appeared again, this time alone, and whatever internal calculation she'd been running all evening finally resolved. She said something about Brendan's future, about what she had built for this family, about how certain arrangements couldn't be allowed to derail that. I honestly couldn't track all of it. My heart was very loud. And then she slapped me. Actually slapped me. Open palm, right cheek, not as hard as she could have, but hard enough that it made a sound. I didn't move. I didn't cry. I looked at her, she said. "You should leave." I looked around. There were people in the hallway, at least 4 of them. A server near the kitchen door. Brendan's cousin by the living room entrance. Nobody moved. 2 of them were looking at their phones. I thought, all of these people are witnesses. I thought, I am going to need to remember that. And then I took out my phone and I called Cillian. He picked up on the second ring. I said, "Can you come?" "I need you to come to the house," he said. "I'm already in the car." And then, after a pause, "Don't go anywhere. I mean it. Stay where you are." He had known. I hadn't had to explain. I went and sat on a bench in the front hall. Brendan found me there about 4 minutes later, which tells you something. It took him 4 minutes to realize I was missing from the party, which means he'd known something was wrong and had kept talking anyway, or he hadn't noticed at all, and I wasn't sure which was worse. "What happened?" he said. "Your mother slapped me," I said. "Twice, in front of witnesses." He sat down beside me. He put his face in his hands. He said, "Fiona, I'm so sorry. She's been under a lot of pressure." "Brendan," I said. "Don't." He was quiet. "She put her hand on me," I said. "That's not a misunderstanding. That's not stress. That's assault." He said, "We can talk to her." "I'll talk to her. She'll apologize." I said, "Will she?" He didn't answer. I said, "I need you to go back in there. My brother is coming." He said, "Why is your brother coming?" "Because I called him," I said. He looked at me with an expression I had not seen on his face before. A small, startled look, like someone who has just realized they've been playing a game with rules they didn't fully read. Cillian got there in 38 minutes. He is 6'1" and works in construction project management in Barrie, and he has the kind of stillness that does not read as calm so much as contained. He parked in the street and walked up the front path, and I met him at the door, and the first thing he said to me was, "You okay?" Not "how bad is it," not "what do you need," just, "Are you okay?" I said yes. He nodded once, then he said quietly, "You called the non-emergency line?" I said I hadn't. He said, "We should do that now, before we do anything else." I hadn't thought of it in those terms: documentation, sequence, evidence. Cillian had. He handed me his phone and I called the Peel Regional Police non-emergency line, and I reported what had happened, very simply, while standing in the front hall of Constance Hartwells' house with the string quartet still playing in the background. The person on the line took my information, told me an officer might be in touch, said I had the right to pursue a formal complaint. I said I understood. I handed Cillian back his phone, and then Constance appeared at the hallway from the living room because someone had apparently gone to find her, and she saw Cillian and she stopped. She said to me, "Who is this?" Cillian said pleasantly, "I'm her brother, and you are?" The way he said it. So even, so completely unmoved. I watched Constance recalibrate in real time. She said, "I'm Brendan's mother. This is my home." Cillian said, "Fiona told me what happened tonight." She told me twice. Actually, the push and then the slap. She told me who else was there when it happened. She's just called the police non-emergency line to report it. He paused. "I just wanted to make sure you knew that." Constance said, "She's exaggerating." Cillian said, "There were witnesses." Silence. Then Constance said, less certainly, "This is a private family matter." Cillian said, "Fiona isn't family." Another pause. "But that can change," he added, "or it doesn't have to. That's between her and Brendan. What isn't between them is what you did tonight. That's a matter of record now." I had never loved my brother more than in that moment. Brendan had appeared somewhere behind his mother. He was standing in the doorway between the hall and the living room, very still. And I could see the party behind him, the white dresses and the candlelight. And he looked like someone standing on the wrong side of a window. I said, "Brendan, I'm leaving." He said, "Fiona, please, just let me." I said, "I'm not angry with you right now. I'm really not. But I need to go." He didn't follow me out. Cillian drove me back to Oakville. He didn't say much, which is the right call. Cillian has always known when not to talk, which is a skill I've never fully mastered. He put on the radio, something low and instrumental, and he drove, and the highway was dark and quiet, and I looked out the window at the lit-up suburbs and the December sky, and I felt something I didn't have a word for. Not sadness, exactly. Not relief, not yet. Something emptier than both of those, and strangely clean. I said, at some point, she really thought I would just stand there. Cillian said, "Most people do." I said, "Do they?" He said, "When someone's done it to them enough times, yeah." That landed somewhere I didn't look at right away. Brendan called me twice that night. I didn't answer. He texted, "Please call me, I want to explain," and then, "I'm so sorry for what happened. I'm talking to her now," and then, around midnight, she says she's willing to apologize. I read that 3 times, she's willing to apologize. As though it were a concession. I turned off my phone and went to sleep. What I didn't know yet, and what I found out in the days after, was that Constance had been making calls about me for months. Brendan didn't tell me this. It was Richard who told me, which surprised me. Brendan's father, the man-shaped shadow, he called me on the Monday after the party, very formally, and asked if he could speak with me. I said yes. He said, "I want you to know that I wasn't aware of the extent of it until this weekend. That's not an excuse." He told me that Constance had spoken to several of Brendan's colleagues over the previous few months, framing their relationship as a temporary thing that Brendan was about to end. She had told at least 2 people that Brendan was planning to leave me after the holidays. She had apparently contacted a woman from Brendan's past. Not Sabrina, someone else. A woman named after a city I've since forgotten. Someone Brendan had dated briefly in his late 20s and suggested that Brendan was emotionally available. Richard said, "I don't think Brendan knew." I said, "I don't know if that makes it better." He said, "It doesn't. But I thought you should know the scope of it." I thanked him. I meant it. He said he was sorry in the specific way that people say it when they mean the whole situation rather than just their part in it. I understood the distinction. When I confronted Brendan with this, not angrily, just plainly, he went very quiet. He didn't deny it. He said, "I don't know why she would do that." And then, after a moment, "She's always been protective." I said, "Brendan, she was contacting women from your past and telling your colleagues we were breaking up. That's not protective. That's sabotage." He said, "I know." I said, "What are you going to do about it?" He was quiet for a long time, long enough that I had my answer. I said, "I'm not asking you to choose between us. I'm asking whether you're going to hold your mother accountable for what she did." He said, "She's my mother, Fiona." I said, "I know." I left his apartment that evening with everything I'd brought over the 8 months we'd been together. A toothbrush, a few books, a sweater I'd left there in October. It fit in a tote bag. That felt significant somehow. I heard from Constance 4 days later. Not a call, a handwritten note, which was either very thoughtful or a calculated performance of thoughtfulness. And at this point, I was not in a position to assume the charitable interpretation. She wrote that she had not intended to cause harm. She wrote that she was very protective of her son. She wrote that she hoped, in time, I could understand that her actions came from love. She wrote that she was sorry if I felt hurt. Sorry if I felt hurt. Not sorry for slapping me. Sorry if I had feelings about it. I passed the note to my lawyer, a friend's older sister who works in civil law, who had very kindly offered to look over my options, and she set it aside and said, "These are good to have." We did not pursue formal charges. That was my choice. Not because what Constance did was acceptable. It wasn't, and I want to be very clear about that. But because I thought about what the next year of my life would look like, and I chose differently. I chose to close the door and walk forward rather than stand in the doorway looking back. But I kept the documentation. I kept everything. And I kept my dignity, which in the specific taxonomy of that family was apparently the most threatening thing I could have done. Brendan called me once more, about 6 weeks after I ended it. He said he'd spoken to a therapist. He said he was starting to understand some things. He said he missed me. I said, I believe you. He said, is there anything? I said, no, there isn't. Not because I was angry, not because I wanted to punish him, but because some endings are just endings, not lessons in progress, not possibilities, just doors that have been closed too many times to open again cleanly. I still work at the clinic in Oakville. I still have the condo with the balcony. The tomatoes did really well this past summer, actually. 4 different varieties. My upstairs neighbor knocked on my door in August to ask where I'd gotten the seeds, and we stood on my balcony for 20 minutes talking about soil and sun exposure, and it was the nicest conversation I'd had in a long time. Cillian came down from Barrie for New Year's. We made fondue and watched a movie, and he fell asleep on my couch at 11:30, and I sat there in the half-dark with the city lights coming in through the window, and I thought about the party, about the hallway, about the sound my champagne glass made when the liquid shifted. I thought about Constance standing there expecting me to absorb it. I thought about dialing Cillian's number. I thought that was the right call. That was exactly the right call. And then I covered my brother with a blanket, and I turned off the light, and I went to bed.